The rain fell gently over the quiet town of Willow Creek, Oregon. It was the kind of slow, steady rain that made the streets empty and the houses feel peaceful. Inside a modest, two-story home on Maple Drive, Daniel Carter sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. At 47 years old, Daniel had lived a full life, but the last 2 years had changed him. After his wife Emily passed away from a long illness, the warmth that once filled the house slowly faded. The laughter, the music, the late-night conversations, everything had gone quiet. Now, most days felt slow and heavy. The only person living with him was his elderly mother, Margaret, whose health had started to decline. Daniel worked long hours managing a small hardware store in town, and he worried about leaving his mother alone all day. After months of concern, his sister finally convinced him to hire a caregiver to help. That was how Linda Brooks entered his life. Linda was 52 years old, calm, polite, and quietly confident. She arrived on a gray Monday morning carrying a small bag and wearing a simple blue jacket. Her dark hair had a few silver strands, but it suited her. She looked like someone who had lived through many experiences and learned how to stay steady through them. When Daniel opened the door and saw her for the first time, he noticed something gentle about her expression. She greeted him with a warm smile that felt natural, not forced. Linda had worked as a caregiver for over 20 years, helping elderly people with daily life, health routines, and companionship. She spoke kindly to Margaret within minutes of meeting her, helping her sit comfortably and asking about her favorite music and hobbies. Margaret liked her immediately. The house slowly began to change after Linda started working there. Before she arrived, the home had felt quiet and almost forgotten during the daytime hours. Curtains stayed closed, the kitchen remained unused, and dust seemed to settle in corners no one noticed. But Linda had a habit of bringing small life back into the spaces she entered. She opened the windows during the day to let in fresh air. She played soft jazz music while preparing simple meals. Sometimes she placed fresh flowers in a small glass vase on the dining table. None of these things were dramatic, but they made the house feel warmer. Daniel began noticing these changes without realizing how much they mattered to him. When he returned home after long days at the hardware store, the house no longer felt empty. The smell of soup or freshly brewed tea often greeted him at the door. Margaret seemed happier too. She laughed more during dinner conversations and often talked about the stories Linda shared with her during the afternoon. At first, Daniel and Linda kept their conversations short and polite. Daniel was naturally quiet, especially since losing his wife. Linda respected that distance. She understood grief better than most people. Working as a caregiver had shown her how deeply people could hurt when life changed suddenly. She never asked personal questions, never pushed for conversations that Daniel might not want. Instead, she focused on her work and spoke with kindness whenever their paths crossed in the house. Over time, small moments began to connect them. One morning, Daniel offered her coffee before leaving for work. She accepted with a thankful smile. Another evening, they talked briefly about the weather while standing on the porch. A few days later, they shared a short conversation about old music records that Margaret liked to play. None of these talks lasted long, but they slowly built a quiet sense of comfort between them. Daniel learned that Linda had spent most of her life in Mudenkopf. Life and Mudenkopf. Like, look at this. Like, look at this. And we all know I've been exploring. And we all know I've been exploring that path. None of these talks lasted long. But we slowly lead alive. But we slowly will lay to leave. We like to we lied. Double K with lack dot unwalk. Up QID to we can lie to you to like kata we with you we with kata to like zoo we see with you to see you to say you to kiki to sai can to see to Washington State before moving to Oregon a few years earlier. She had cared for many elderly people, sometimes living with families for months at a time. When Daniel once asked if she had children, Linda simply shook her head with a soft smile. Life just moved differently for me, she said. Daniel didn't ask more, but he sensed there was a deeper story behind her words. Weeks passed, and the rhythm of daily life became familiar. Daniel left early for work each morning while Linda helped Margaret with breakfast and medication. In the afternoon, she often sat beside Margaret near the living room window while sunlight filled the room. They listened to old music or talked about stories from Margaret's younger years. By evening, Daniel returned home, sometimes tired, sometimes distracted by work, but always greeted by the calm atmosphere Linda created. One evening near the start of autumn, Daniel came home later than usual. The store had been busy and he had spent hours lifting heavy boxes of equipment and tools. His shoulders felt stiff and sore, but he ignored the pain as he stepped inside. The lights were on in the kitchen and Linda was standing by the sink washing dishes. Margaret had already gone to sleep. "You look tired," Linda said gently when she saw him. Daniel shrugged as he placed his keys on the counter. "Just a long day at the store." He tried to sound casual, but as he reached for a glass in the cabinet, a sharp pull tightened across his shoulder. He winced slightly, hoping she didn't notice, but Linda noticed everything. "You hurt your shoulder," she said calmly. Daniel gave a small laugh. "It's nothing serious. Just lifted too many boxes today." Linda dried her hands with a towel and studied his posture carefully. Years of caregiving had trained her to read small signs people often ignored. She could see the tension in the way Daniel held his arm. "I've seen that before," she said. "Muscle strain." Daniel leaned against the counter. "It'll pass." Linda hesitated for a moment, thinking quietly. Then she said something that surprised him. "If you'd like, I could help." Daniel looked confused. "Help how?" She lifted her hand slightly and explained, "Sometimes gentle hand therapy can relax the muscles. I've helped many people with shoulder tension over the years." Daniel blinked, unsure what to say. The idea felt unusual. No one had taken care of him like that since Emily was alive. For a moment he felt awkward even considering it. "I don't want to trouble you," said politely. Linda smiled in a calm and reassuring way. "It's not trouble. It's part of what caregivers do." The rain outside had started again, tapping softly against the windows. The house felt warm and quiet. After a brief pause, Daniel nodded. "All right, maybe just a little." They moved to the living room where a lamp cast a soft yellow light across the furniture. Daniel sat down in the old armchair near the window. Linda stood behind him, placing her hands gently on his shoulder. Her touch was steady and professional, the way someone works after many years of experience. She carefully pressed the tense muscles around his shoulder and neck, easing the tightness little by little. Daniel closed his eyes slightly as the pain slowly faded. "You're good at this," he said quietly. Linda gave a light laugh. "Practice helps." For several minutes, the room stayed silent except for the soft rain outside and the ticking clock on the wall. The moment felt peaceful, almost comforting. There was nothing inappropriate about it, just a simple act of care between two adults who had both lived long enough to understand life's struggles. As Linda continued working, she sensed something deeper than physical tension. Daniel carried emotional weight, too. His shoulders felt like they had been holding sadness for a long time. After a while, she stepped back. "That should help." Daniel slowly rolled his shoulder. The sharp ache had almost disappeared. "That's actually much better," he admitted. "Thank you." Linda nodded and began gathering the towel she had used earlier. But before leaving the room, she paused. Her expression turned thoughtful. "Daniel, may I ask you something?" He looked up at her with curiosity. "Sure." Linda took a small breath before speaking. She wasn't nervous, but she wanted to choose her words carefully. "Have you ever thought about letting someone care for you again?" Daniel blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" Linda met his eyes gently. "I mean not just as a caregiver for your mother. I mean for you." The question hung quietly in the air. Daniel felt his heart beat a little faster. No one had asked him something like that since Emily died. He had spent 2 years focusing only on work and responsibilities. Linda quickly added, "I'm not suggesting anything rushed. I just think people deserve warmth in their lives, even after difficult times." Daniel didn't answer right away. His mind filled with memories of the past. but also with the present moment, the calm house, the sound of rain, and the woman standing nearby who had slowly brought life back into his home for the first time in a long while. He realized something important. His heart might still be capable of opening again. But before he could find the right words to respond, Linda quietly turned toward the hallway, and Daniel had no idea that the following evening, she would return with an unexpected offer that could change both of their lives forever. The next evening in Willow Creek arrived quietly. The sky turned soft orange as the sun lowered behind the tall pine trees. Inside Daniel Carter's house, the lights glowed warmly through the windows. Daniel returned home earlier than usual that day. His mind had been distracted since the conversation with Linda the night before. Her question had stayed with him the entire day. Would you ever consider letting someone care for you again? It was not a simple question. For 2 years, Daniel had lived in a quiet routine. Work, home, dinner with his mother, then long evenings alone. He had convinced himself that this was enough. That life after loss simply became quieter. But Linda's words had opened something he had tried not to think about. When Daniel stepped inside the house, the familiar smell of vegetable soup filled the air. The kitchen lights were on, and soft music played in the background. Linda stood near the stove stirring a pot while Margaret sat at the table reading a small magazine. Margaret smiled when she saw her son. "You're home early today." Daniel nodded. "Slow day at the store." Linda turned and greeted him with the same calm smile she always had. "Dinner will be ready soon." Daniel hung his jacket near the door and walked to the sink to wash his hands. His shoulder felt better after the help she gave him the night before. The tension had almost disappeared, but something else remained, an unusual sense of anticipation. During dinner, the conversation stayed light. Margaret talked about an old television show she remembered from years ago. Linda listened and laughed politely. Daniel mostly stayed quiet, though he occasionally added a few comments. But he noticed something different about Linda that evening. She seemed thoughtful, almost like she was deciding whether to say something important. After dinner, Margaret grew tired and went to her room early. Linda helped her take medication and made sure she was comfortable before returning to the living room. Daniel sat on the couch reading a newspaper. Though he had barely focused on the words, Linda entered the room slowly and sat in the chair across from him. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan. Finally, Linda broke the silence. "I hope I didn't make you uncomfortable yesterday," she said gently. Daniel lowered the newspaper and shook his head. "No, you didn't." He paused before continuing. "I just haven't thought about that part of life in a long time." Linda nodded with understanding. "That's completely natural." She folded her hands together calmly. "I only ask because sometimes people forget they deserve companionship, especially after loss." Daniel looked down at the floor for a moment. "Emily and I were married for 20 years, he said quietly. "After she passed, everything felt different. I didn't know how to move forward." Linda listened without interrupting. Daniel continued. "So I focused on work and taking care of my mother. It was easier than thinking about the future." Linda understood that feeling. Many people she had cared for carried similar stories. But she also believed something else. Life could surprise people again, if they allowed it. She leaned forward slightly. "That's actually why I wanted to talk to you tonight." Daniel looked up with curiosity. Linda took a slow breath before explaining, "I've been thinking about my own future, too." Daniel waited for her to continue. Linda spoke calmly, but her voice carried quiet honesty. "For many years, I've taken care of others. It has been meaningful work, but it also meant moving from house to house, family to family. I never built a place that truly felt like my own home." Daniel listened carefully. She continued. "When I started working here, something felt different. Your house is peaceful. Your mother is kind, and you treat people with respect." Daniel wasn't sure where the conversation was going, but he felt a growing sense of importance in her words. Linda gave a small smile. So, been thinking about something unusual. Daniel leaned forward slightly. What kind of something? Linda hesitated for only a moment before saying it clearly. I would like to make you an offer. Daniel raised his eyebrows in surprise. What kind of offer? Linda explained slowly so there would be no misunderstanding. I've saved some money over the years. Caregiving doesn't make people rich, but living simply allowed me to put some aside. Daniel nodded, still unsure what she meant. Linda continued. I've been thinking about staying here permanently, not only as your mother's caregiver, but as a partner in building a home again. Daniel blinked, stunned by the idea. Linda quickly added, I'm not talking about rushing into romance or anything dramatic. I simply mean two adults sharing life, supporting each other, and creating warmth in a home. Daniel leaned back against the couch. Processing what she had said, Linda spoke with quiet sincerity. I've seen many lonely homes in my work. People living under the same roof, but feeling completely alone. I believe homes should feel alive. She gestured gently around the room. This house already has that potential. Daniel's mind raced. No one had ever suggested something like this to him before. Linda continued explaining her idea. If you're open to it, I would like to invest some of my savings into improving the house. Small repairs, maybe a garden outside, maybe turning the empty guest room into a reading space for your mother. Daniel listened in silence. Her words were practical, thoughtful, and surprisingly hopeful. But the most important thing, Linda added softly, is companionship. We could support each other. No pressure, no expectations. Just two adults choosing not to live alone anymore. The room grew quiet again. Daniel looked around his living room. For 2 years, the house had been filled with memories, but little future. Now, for the first time, someone was talking about building something new inside it. He studied Linda carefully. Her expression was calm, honest, and patient. She wasn't asking for anything sudden. She was offering partnership. After a moment, Daniel asked, Why me? Linda smiled gently. Because you're a good man who forgot that life, can still move forward. Daniel felt a small laugh escape him. That's a simple answer. Sometimes the simple answers are the most honest. She replied. Daniel stood and walked toward the window. Outside, the rain had stopped. The streetlights reflected softly on the wet pavement. He thought about the past 2 years. The quiet dinners, the long evenings alone. The feeling that life had paused. Then he thought about the last few months since Linda arrived, the open windows, the music, the laughter his mother shared. Again, the warmth slowly returning to the house. Daniel turned back toward her. You've already changed this house, he admitted. Linda looked slightly surprised. I just tried to make things comfortable. Did more than that? He walked back to the couch and sat down again. I didn't realize how lonely the place had become until it started feeling alive again. Linda listened quietly. Daniel rubbed his hands together. Thoughtfully, I'm not ready to replace Emily, he said. Honestly, Linda nodded. I would never ask you to. Daniel looked up. But maybe. I am ready to stop living alone. Linda's eyes softened with quiet understanding. Daniel continued. Your idea isn't crazy. It's actually thoughtful. Linda smiled gently but didn't interrupt. Daniel leaned forward. If we try this, we do it slowly. We focus on building a good home first. Everything else can grow naturally. Linda's smile grew warmer. That's exactly what I hoped for. Daniel extended his hand toward her. Linda looked at it for a moment, then shook it with a calm but meaningful gesture. It wasn't a romantic moment. It was something steadier, a quiet agreement between two adults who had lived long enough to understand life's unexpected turns. At that moment, Margaret's voice echoed from the hallway. Is someone still awake? Daniel and Linda both laughed softly. Daniel stood up. Looks like we have our first house meeting tomorrow morning. Linda smiled. For the first time in many years, The house on Maple Drive no longer felt like a place frozen in the past. It felt like a home where something new was beginning. And as the night settled peacefully over Willow Creek, Daniel realized something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope had quietly returned to his life.